But there's something from the last class that I think is very important. Remember, the last class was all about who would open and read the scroll. And we had this introduction by John to the throne of the Lamb and the thousands upon thousands which surrounded it. But there was this problem. Who was going to be able to open and read the scroll? And what we saw from Revelation 4 and 5 there was that it is the Lamb. It's the Lamb of God who has the authority to do that. And he has the authority because of two things, really. His birthright as the Son of God. But then there is this aspect which says, the record says, he is worthy to open the scroll. So there is both a right of birth, almost as a rite of passage by virtue of birth. But to be able to do this work, he had to also be worthy or worth something. That is, the experiences of life, and his life was, as it were, an accolade to his birth. He was worth something. It wasn't purely by birthright. The children of Israel were a nation by birthright, weren't they? But they didn't prove themselves to be worthy of the blessings that God would bring. And so we sort of saw there that the same thing applies to those who are around the throne. Because saints, we are called, we are chosen. That's a birthright. We become the sons of God by adoption, says Paul in Hebrews. But the other qualification that is there of this group of people is that they are faithful. In other words, their life is lived in direct parallel with, or as a consequence of, or in conformity with their birthright. Being a son of God, being called and chosen, it's not axiomatic. Well, that's another one of those words. There's about 3 words I'll use tonight that Carolyn's a bit worried about. It's not axiomatic that we would be in the kingdom. We have to show that characteristic during our life, that consistency of faithfulness. And that really sort of summarises a bit of the last class, that the important thing to understand that this quality of life is very important, not just the calling which we have received. Now, what do these saints, these faithful saints, do? Well, there is something here that came in Revelation 5, and it comes also in Revelation 14, that they sing a new song. So when they're gathered around the throne, John sees them gathered together and they sing a new song. You know, I don't know, they haven't been to the community choir, or maybe they have been to the community choir. No, that's not the point. It's not a new song of that sort of thing. There's this very peculiar expression that is used there in Revelation 5 and 14 about a new song. And it's new not in the sense of being unknown, but it's new in the sense of freshness. And that's the idea of the Greek word. It means fresh. This is a fresh song. That's why it's, as it were, it's not new. It's, as it were, a new song. But what's new about it? Not the words, not the understanding, but the freshness with which they sing it. Now, this expression is not unique. In fact, it occurs several times in Psalm 33, Psalm 40, Psalm 96, Psalm 98, Psalm 144, Psalm 149, and Isaiah 42. The same expression, this new song. The point is they all refer to salvation. And that's what Revelation 5 and 14 do. They talk about salvation. That's what all those songs are involved with. And the Isaiah one is the destruction of the nations, which brings about salvation. But this is salvation. It's personal. What's it all about, brothers and sisters? What makes it fresh? What makes it new? Well, I suggest this, brothers and sisters, it's new not by content, but by experience. Not by content, but by experience. In other words, what John is seeing and what is being explained to him, brothers and sisters, is that not only were they called and chosen, but they were faithful, and they can sing this song about salvation because they have now experienced it. It's different to what we have today. Today we have a theoretical knowledge. Nothing wrong with that. It's necessary. We need to have a foundation for faith. But here, brothers and sisters, in the apocalypse, we're being sort of explained and shown to us that this is experience. Our life today is not forgotten. We will understand, and having experienced salvation, we will appreciate it because it becomes a song of joy, a song of praise, a song of thankfulness. But there is a difference, brothers and sisters, isn't there, between knowing salvation and experiencing salvation. And that's what the record is saying to us. In John chapter 12, for example, and the same thing happened with the Lord, and so I'll use him as our example. In John chapter 12, verse 23, it uses the expression, the hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Now that's what the Lord said to his disciples in explaining what was happening and what was going to be happening. The hour is come that the Son of Man is glorified. And he spoke about those things. But look at the difference, brothers and sisters. It's very different in John chapter 13. When Jesus knew his hour was come. It's one thing to know that the Son of Man must go to Jerusalem and be crucified and be raised on the third day. That was the theory. That is what he said and explained to his disciples who didn't really understand it. But by the time we get to John chapter 13, it's not the hour. It's not the fulfilment of all the prophecies which he knew about. This now was his hour. This was his time. And we experience the same thing, brothers and sisters, don't we? It's very different to be able to sort of say, everything works for good to them who love and fear God. We can say that. We do, we quote it. We often say it, don't we? But how do you feel when you experience it? Do you have the same mindset when the pressures and the issues and the trials of life come upon us? Is it the same? No, I'd suggest, brothers and sisters, that there's a difference between the hour, knowing the theory, and our hour, or in the Lord's case, his hour. They're two very different things. And that's what it's going to be like when we actually are changed. When this mortal puts on immortality, then shall we walk to pass the saying, well, death is swallowed up in victory. We know that, but it'll be a totally different thing when we experience it. And when we do experience, brothers and sisters, we burst into a new song, a fresh song, because now we have experienced salvation. Not because we know the facts do we sing, but because we have now experienced it. And that, I hope, sort of helps to invigorate, make a freshness in our mind now. And when we do experience our hours, as we all will from time to time, hopefully a thought like this can help us to get through our own personal trials. So this new song, this fresh song, is a thankfulness that's based on reflection. A reflection of what? Well, when you look at it in Revelation 5, you'll see it talks about the cost of salvation. You were slain. Our salvation is brought about with a cost, and we feel that, we understand that. We see in our Lord the wounds in his hands and his side. We understand that more personally than probably what we do today. We sing about the effect of salvation because it says you have redeemed us. On the right-hand side, they're the words which are in the song. You were slain, you've redeemed us. Where? Well, suddenly our eyes are open to a far broader sort of view than our very narrow sort of anglicised, whatever, view of life. It's every nation. It's every kindred. It's every tongue. This brotherhood and these people saved are from everywhere. And then there is the acceptance of the elevation of salvation. You've made us kings and priests. How could we not conclude without a chorus of praise? And it's a chorus of praise, brothers and sisters, that just bursts from everyone. Well, worthy is the Lamb, because it is by virtue of what the Lamb has done that we are in this position. And when we reflect on that, brothers and sisters, in that great assembly, not the 24 elders around the throne, whoever they might be, not the 144,000 who sort of surround that, but that vision is of thousands upon 10,000s of people. And we're going to see some numbers tonight that maybe sort of indicate that it is a very big majority of people. But we need to separate fact from fiction, because as the apocalypse is, it's full of these visions which sometimes are very hard to get our head around, or they're open to all sorts of interpretations, as we know. And sometimes people tend to shy away from it. Well, I don't want to shy away from it. I want to just sort of have a look at it, and okay, people have got this thought and that thought and whatever. Well, I've got a few thoughts. You might not agree with them. That's fine. You can be wrong. I don't have a problem with that. So let's have a look at these facts. Now, there are some facts out of the record, and possibly I'll accept that they are challengeable, or the interpretation of some of them are challengeable. But there's a couple of things to take note of. In Revelation 21, when it talks about this city, whatever, and we'll get to looking at it in a bit more detail, there are measurements given, right? And as there are measurements given in other chapters, like chapter 11. But in chapter 11, there's a reed like a rod that's in the hand. But here we have a golden reed. It's a different measuring device. Is it a different size? Well, I'm not sure. But it seems to indicate there's a difference here. If it was just a reed, well, we'd say, well, okay, it's a rod to measure. But what is it measuring? Well, one was measuring all sorts of times and seasons and whatever else. But this one is a golden reed. And we go straight away, don't we, to the first indicator that maybe this is measuring faith. This is measuring tried faith. This is a different type of measure when we come to look at the city. And that sort of ties in with the fact that the city, as we're told, the New Jerusalem, verse 2 of chapter 21, is coming out of heaven as a bride adorned for a husband. And then when he says, I will show you the bride, and he shows him the New Jerusalem in verse 10. So we're not necessarily talking about physical things when we're looking at this New Jerusalem. And the measure, it's a bit strange. It's a furlong. What's a furlong? Who knows what a furlong is? An eighth of a mile. How fast can your horse run it? You've been down the track lately? I mean, a furlong is a measure, isn't it, for racing horses, is it? Yes. Yeah. I mean, how far away from the hall do you live, Ian? 20 furlongs or 20 kilometres? No one's going to say, I'm this far away with a furlong, are they? Andrew?
It's a stadium, isn't it? Which is...
Oh, yeah, hold on. Where's a bucket of water? Yeah. I'll get to that. I'm saying, when it says a furlong, it's a weird sort of measurement, but is it? Well, the actual word, as Andrew said, is actually stadia, from which we get like stadium, and typically it was a Greek arena for horse measurement, for horse racing, chariot racing and whatever, which is why the English have translated it as a furlong, because that's the measure that we use for horse racing, right? It's just, I think it's probably as simple as that, the Greek word stadia. And in fact, a furlong is 206.1, about 206.1 metres, if we want to translate it into sort of size. But interesting, the word stadia, it's still used today. Does anyone know where we use the word stadia, or how it's used?
Stadiums.
Big pardon?
Stadiums.
No. Well, they might use it in the construction of a stadium.
The performance venues.
It's the surveyor's stand. You've seen surveyors out there with their, beg your pardon? Theodolites.
With the tripods.
Yeah, and then you'll see one guy sort of down the road with a rod, and it's got all these markings on it, horizontal lines on it, right? And so the theodolite guy, he stands there, he's the manager because he's got the easy job. He just sort of goes up and down and tells the guy lift, down, whatever else. And it's to use to measure level areas, basically, and what the deviation is and that sort of stuff. And it's called a stadia, even today. It's a surveyor's stadia. So it's an idea of measurement. That's purely what it is used. So it's a surveyor's rod used in conjunction with the theodolite to determine levels. But if we said, okay, well, that's fine, 206 metres and whatever else, this is this city, there are facts which are totally contradictory at a physical level. Interesting, but they are kind of contradictory. Let's have a look. The wall, so I'm going to say the height of the city, because we're given the figures there, is 144 cubits, which is about 76 metres. Okay, so what's 76 metres? I don't know. What's the length of this hall? It's probably about 80 metres, I don't know, to the front door, something like that. So I put that up vertically. That's the height of the wall. What's the point of a wall around a city in those days? Protection. It's okay. So we've got 76 metres of wall to protect this city. But the city, in its length, is 12,000 furlongs. 12,000 by 201.6 is 2,419,200 metres. So, okay, over 2 million metres in length. Its volume, we're told, because the length is the same as the breadth, is the same as the height. Now, if the wall's 76 metres and the city is 2.4 million metres, it's not really much of a wall, is it? I mean, you've got a fair bit of expanded area up there for the Ukrainians to hit with their drones. And we're told the volume of the city, 12 by 12 by 12. That's 1 billion, 1.7 billion cubic metres. This is enormous. How could John even see it? And the footprint of the area is 12,000 by 12,000, which is 5.5 million square metres. The numbers are just blow your mind, don't you? I mean, they're enormous. Well, let's put them in perspective. Let's do some comparisons. The surface area of the Earth is 509.6 square kilometres. The footprint of the city is 5,856,400, which is 1.15% of the surface area of the Earth. It doesn't make any sense. How could you have a city that size physically? It doesn't make a lot of sense. But it gets worse. Let's think about the population of the world. Population's about, the last figure, about 7.8, take a few million or whatever you want to do, but about 7.8. The volume of the city, let's say it represents the saints, is 1.7, which is 23% of the world. Now, that might be. We don't know how many people are going to be saved or whatever else, but If this city, given the cube, is representative of the people occupying 23% of the world's population, big number. Not quite sure where their concept of a remnant shall be saved fits into that sort of number, but maybe maybe we've got that totally wrong. Maybe there will be a lot more people in the kingdom than what we think. So, what do you think? The question. If the city is the bride of Christ, do the measurements equate to the population? Have a think about it. Because they certainly don't relate to a physical city. I mean, just take, for example, John saw this as we read. He took me up into a high hill. Verse 10, he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. How could he see? What was the size of the mountain that lets him see 1% of the surface of the earth? If you stand, well, most people, I'm looking at some others, Andrew could see the horizon. How far away is the horizon, Andrew, if you stand on your feet? It's about 4.8 kilometres. Paul is probably slightly less. Whatever. How high would the mountain be to be able to see at least, 1,000 kilometres? Couldn't see it, physically could not do it. So physically, the things don't compute. And that's the conundrum, right? So it's okay, now you can go to sleep, Clive. I said he had to stay awake until I hit the word conundrum. So now let's just look at some of the aspects of this city, because they're beautiful, but once again, we sort of get taken in thought, and your mind can wander into different areas, but we are given layers, or it's called foundations. It's quite distinct. The walls are one thing, and then the foundations are another. And the walls have got these stones around the outside, the jewels, which are all the tribes of Israel, 3 to a side. But the foundations are the apostles, we're told, which are also given stones. And there's a representation of the colours of the stones. But you have to be aware and accept the fact we can't be sure of what stones are actually here. I mean, there are stones on the breastplate. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And there are these stones. There is some correlation between the two of them, but not exact, because we've lost what they are in antiquity. Some of the stones mentioned, we have no idea what they are. Plus also there is a lot of tradition has come into play. As you can imagine, the Jews, the high priest breastplate hasn't been preserved from when it was made down to now. And so that too is a subject of some debate. And people go to all sorts of lengths, to try and get this correlation going. And I'm going to go to a little bit of correlation too. But look at this. The list appears to be based on Septuagint's version of the list of jewels in the breastplate. So they make that connection, right? And that's fair enough. I think it's a good connection. But look what they then try and do with the classic image of the breastplate of the high priest with the 4 rows of 3. It says, if the top of the breastplate's rotated 180 degrees and the bottom half is turned upside down, and also with the Onshanan additionally swapping places with the Tozapan, so we swap a couple of stones around, the lists become extremely similar. There are only 4 differences. But you've basically reconstructed everything, right? Yeah, and Scripture doesn't work that way, does it, brothers and sisters? The one thing we do know about Scripture is consistency. And so when it talks of an image this way, then the image flows through. When it talks about a symbol this way, the symbol flows through. And it gives us that confidence, doesn't it, to be able to look back and say, okay, that is what is meant. And although the symbols themselves, physically can be difficult, like we saw with the cherubim, and there can be all sorts of interpretations, and the same thing here with the stones. If we can find a consistency here with stones and shape, then we can have a little bit more confidence as to what is actually being said to us. Because it's got something to do with the 12 tribes, because as we read in the record, it's got all the tribes around the edge, around the wall. It's got something to do with the foundation of the apostles, with the 12 apostles, and it's got something to do with the breastplate of the high priest. How do they all sort of correlate? Is there a correlation? Well, we're told clearly there are 12 stones, but as I've said, there's a bit of argument about the interpretation of what stones. But what happens, classically happens, is that image that you have of just the 12 stones, they try to correlate with the breastplate of the high priest. And that is the classic image that you would have seen of the high priest's breastplate, right? I don't think anyone will sort of debate that. That's how it's sort of shown. But the reality is that's probably not how it was. Lost in antiquity is in actual fact what it really was and how it really was, a bit like Urim and Thummim. You'll see there in those, the priest's hands there is the black and the white Urim and Thummim, which is also a thought as to what happens. Why are we interested in that? Well, there's a couple of simple quotes, aren't there? And that is that God says, in that day when I make up my jewels, right, then those that have talked often one to another will be remembered. In other words, we are equated, brothers and sisters, with jewels. With the high priest, the jewels represented each of the tribes of Israel, and we'll see exactly what that meant is they were to see in those jewels themselves as individuals and as tribes. Well, we're not associated with tribes, but we are associated as jewels, aren't we? And we see ourselves, or we should see ourselves, God sees us as jewels, right? Now, you can turn up Exodus 28, or I'll sort of run through it here, and I've highlighted a couple of things about this breastplate. First of all, it was 4 square. So it wasn't rectangular, that way or that way. It was a square. The ones you see the high priest have, that they say, you'll see it's actually rectangular, which isn't actually what Scripture says. It's quite clear, 4 square. A span shall be the length, and a span shall be the breadth. It's very particular. Now, thou shalt, verse 17, setting of stones, even 4 rows of stones. And people say, oh, well, there you go. There's your 4 rows of 3 stones. No. The Hebrew actually there for rows is not rows as in we know it. It's actually the root word for a wall. Just put that in the back of your head. And so we have the first, the second, the third, whatever else. And the stone shall be with the names of the children of Israel. Every one with his name. And that's the point that's trying to make. So they shall be according to the 12 tribes. So every Jew who looked at that breastplate, who saw the priest wear the breastplate, could identify with it. And that's the point, brothers and sisters. They could identify their stone or a stone on there with the name of their tribe engraved on it. Can you imagine the high priest in the Day of Atonement? He's out there and he brings out the 2 goats, and the one's sacrificed and the other he's out amongst the people. He lets it go. Oh, I want to, where am I on that high? How close would you have to get to see your name or your tribe engraved on that stone? I don't think you'd get that close to the high priest, to be perfectly honest with you. But you had to understand that your name is there. The names of the children of Israel. And in fact, the record says further, it's engraved, as it were, on his heart. And the other thing, thou shalt then put in the breastplate of judgment the Urim and the Thummim, and they shall be upon Aaron's heart, which were the stones of judgment, the binary stones, black, white, shining, not shining, whatever it means. The real meaning is lost in antiquity. We don't even know what the stones were. But the idea was that it would be next to his heart. So somewhere there had to be like a pouch or something like that, where when judgment was to be, the priest could take Urim and Thummim, he'd put his hand in and he'd pull out. And the answer would be from God. All right? And then put it back in. So it was either yes or no. In fact, I think the expression, you might have heard the expression that's not common now, but entry into clubs or even boardroom decisions and whatever, it used to be blackballed. In other words, a vote would be taken around the table and you'd have a black ball and a white ball. And if you agreed, a white ball would go into a cloth, and if you disagreed, a black ball. And when the bag was revealed by the chairman or whatever, if there was a black ball, then whatever, you weren't admitted, or right? Same sort of idea. That's where the expression black ball comes from, I believe. I understand. I think you can argue about it. Okay, let's have a little bit more of a look about this. And we'll see, hopefully by the end, the picture of where this New Jerusalem fits in right from back in the wilderness wanderings. The four square means exactly that, four-sided. And when it says thou shalt make it doubled, as it does, it means folded or a mirror image. In other words, it was identical. It didn't matter sort of which way you looked at it, it was identical. It's a mirror image of each other. The length and the breadth, exactly the same. And the 4 rows, actually the word ter, means a range or a wall. Everyone can identify with this, and that Urim and Thummim is amongst it or in it. It's not separated, it's not somewhere else, it's right in the middle. Now, how does this relate to Revelation? Well, there was a wall, great and high, had 12 gates, on which verse 12 says, are the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. So somehow the Israelites are going to be able to relate to this, but they're on the walls. On the east, 3. On the north, 3. On the south, 3. On the west, 3. It wasn't 4 rows of 3 stones. 3, 3, 3, 3. That's where the 12 came from. And the same then with 12 foundations stacked on one another in Revelation. Now, when you go back to the wandering in the nation of Israel, that's what the camp looked like. Wouldn't it make sense if the high priest's breastplate represented the camp layout? Because on the north you had 3, on the east 3, on the south 3, on the west 3 tribes. And if you looked at the high priest's garment from afar or whatever, and you were, say, the tribe of Manasseh, you would see it over here. And if you were the tribe of Issachar, you'd see a stone over here. You'd be able to say, oh yeah, that's my encampment. That's my tribe. That's where I am. Now, I don't think there were gaps there in the corners. I think probably more realistically, but the picture is not maybe as clear as the first one. I think that they would have, because otherwise the Amorites and whatever could have come straight in the camp. I mean, that would be a pretty dumb layout, wouldn't it? But so you'd probably go diagonally across and still have the 3 tribes on north, south, east and west. Make sense? Reasonable? Is there a correlation with the high priest's breastplate? I think so. Can't prove it. You can disagree. That's fine. But the concept there is totally different, isn't it? If you have rows, it just doesn't correlate to 4 sides, 4 walls, 3 on a side, the encampment of Israel at all. I think that something like that correlates more so, because that is the image of the temple with the 3 stones on each side of the 4 walls. And what is in the middle? Well, we see this gold building, or this representation of the saints. Well, in the middle of the encampment of Israel was the glory of God, was the tabernacle, was where judgment was, where the Urim and Thummim were, right in the centre. So I suggest, brothers and sisters, with all due respect, I should look at my notes sometimes, shouldn't I? That is probably a better representation. It's a bit rough. I mean, I'm not a real good artist, as many people can testify. But I think mentally, if we can just understand right from the time of the encampment in Israel, which was the presence of God in their midst, in the middle, right through to the kingdom age, there is this consistency of imagery. Well, what of the rest of the detail? Well, there's a lot there, but I want to maybe just think about a couple of things, brothers and sisters. And that is, for example, the timing of this and what happens. Because you see, when John received this vision, and as is absolutely classic with Revelation, remember I said backwards and forwards, is what the imagery of Revelation is like all the time. That's what we have here. Because when he comes to receive this picture, and why it's relevant to us today and in the future, is in verse 9. There came unto me one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials full of the 7 last plagues, and talked with me. Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. Now, if it was one of the angels, well, it was one of the angels, it's a fact, having the 7 vials full of the 7 last plagues, then the timing of this imagery isn't actually at the end of the millennium, because the angel still is one of those with the 7 vials that are plagues which are poured out upon the earth. Now, this is an image of what we should be like now, in anticipation of the future, brothers and sisters. But this is the sort of imagery of the scriptures which is saying to us, well, think of yourselves embedded in that wool as jewels. Think of yourselves as having tried faith and pure faith. Think of yourself, as it says in the streets of the city, are like pure gold, clear as crystal, which means it's very finely beaten and I guess luminous. Is that how we see ourselves today? Or do we sort of beat ourselves up a bit? Do we sort of think, well, we don't need to, brothers and sisters. This record is given to us so that we can go past whatever present trial, trouble, tribulation that we face. And this image is given to us to say, well, this is how I see you as my bride. I don't see you as some beaten up, trodden down, despondent, just hopeless. Now, we have every reason, brothers and sisters, to be joyful, to be positive, because this is how we are told the bride is seen, as a work of God coming down out of heaven, prepared. It's in anticipation. And of course, the chapter in the early part actually goes to the end of the millennium. That's what I mean. This thing flip-flops from that. But this particular vision of the New Jerusalem, of the bride of Christ, is, in fact, for us to think about now as to what the future will be like. And as I said, it's very experienced. And the fact, that it should impact us and help us with the tough times in life is here given that even when this becomes reality, as it were, in verse 4, because those first few verses, I think, relate to the end of the millennium, we read in verse 4 this: God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. Hold on a minute. I thought if you're immortal, all-powerful, spirit-filled, like the angels, where do tears come into it? Why at that point in time is there a necessity for God to wipe away all tears from our eyes? Because this life doesn't totally leave us in that sense until this point in time, brothers and sisters, at the end of the millennium, when there is no more death, when there is no more sorrow, literally. I don't know how he's going to do it, obviously. No one knows how he does it. And whatever causes you tears today, and the memory of it maybe brings tears to your eyes in that day, or, you know, whatever it is. We can have the confidence that ultimately, that sorrow, that pain is going to disappear. And these sayings, he says, and he wants to reinforce this to us, brothers and sisters. Verse 5, these words are true and faithful. If nothing else, brothers and sisters, if nothing else, we can hold on to that, can't we? Not worry about all the ins and outs and the intricacies and whatever else. That's fine. It's interesting, maybe. Maybe not for some, but we can hold on to this, can't we? There shall be in no wise enter anything that defileth, whatsoever worketh abomination, worketh a lie, but there are some that will be there. They are those which are written in the Lamb's book of life. The Lamb's book of life. The Lamb who gave his life for us. The Lamb who is worthy. The Lamb, brethren and sisters, before whom we will assemble and sing our song with a freshness that salvation has brought. And ultimately, God just wiping away any residual tear. What a vision. You know, this book of Revelation, brothers and sisters, it's got to be a vision, doesn't it? That can see us through the darkest days. Thank you.